The city rose with a rhythm all its own, a pulse that whispered like the beating of drums hidden behind glass towers. Markets smelled of kola nuts, dried fish, and smoke from hearths where women ground maize, their hands moving in the same patterns their mothers had taught them. The sun reflected off the tall towers of steel and glass, mirroring ambition and wealth, while the winding streets below held the weight of tradition, stories older than any official record. Every alley carried voices of laughter, bargaining, and sometimes sorrow, as if the city itself breathed life into its people. Children darted between carts, goats trotted through narrow paths, and elders sat beneath the shade of baobabs, watching silently. Amid this living city, a woman moved like a shadow of patience. Her steps were quiet, measured, yet her eyes held an unspoken resolve. She had been taught to lower her voice, not her values. From childhood, elders had told her, the river does not shout to reach the ocean, it flows patiently, yet it shapes the land. She had learned that silence could be a shield, endurance a weapon, and respect a way to survive. Every lesson her mother and grandmother passed down was stitched with purpose. Patience was power, humility was armor, and strength did not always speak. Her marriage into a powerful family promised stability, status, and respect. But beneath the polished floors and polished smiles, she quickly sensed a world where truth bowed to appearances. Conversations were measured, smiles were rehearsed, and love was a currency spent only when obedience was offered. She realized that in this household, a wrong word could echo longer than 100 compliments. The walls listened. Eyes measured. Hearts were judged not by kindness, but by conformity. Her own feelings were quietly folded into a corner, tucked away behind gestures that the family could display proudly to neighbors and friends. At first, the neglect was subtle, disguised as guidance. Instructions came with sharp politeness. Critiques came wrapped in concern. She was told, "Do not worry your thoughts with what cannot be changed. We will shape you well." And she obeyed, learning the rhythm of approval and censure. Over time, the line between care and control blurred. She cleaned, prepared, and managed, while her own desires shrank to whispers in the night. Every reprimand labeled as discipline, every expectation framed as love, carved patience into her spirit. She walked each day with quiet dignity, knowing that no shout, no tear, no protest would change the course of her household. Yet within her, the river of her soul ran deep, unseen, shaping her resolve, ready to carve its own path when the moment came. The news came quietly, like a soft prayer carried on the morning wind. She felt the flutter first, a small rhythm in her belly, and with it came a light she had not dared to hope for. In the privacy of her thoughts, she whispered a prayer, asking only for safety, for guidance, and for strength. This small life, growing within her, became proof of her loyalty, her patience, and her worth in a home where her value had often been measured in obedience. For a fleeting moment, she felt peace. The house seemed lighter, the air less tense, as if even the walls acknowledged this small miracle. Her steps carried her to the hospital, where the world outside her door seemed ordinary and calm. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency, the scent of antiseptic mingling with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers outside. She smiled at the receptionist, nodded to the orderly, and let the routine cradle her. Nothing warned her of the storm waiting just beyond the sterile walls. She trusted the system, trusted the hands that had helped so many before her. She trusted the rhythm of life itself. Even as she walked through these halls, the words of elders lingered in her mind, whispered across generations. What grows in silence can heal or destroy. Watch closely and act with patience. Their caution wrapped around her like a shawl. Every story they had told her, the tales of hidden truths, of loyalty betrayed, of honor tested, hovered like shadows in the corners of her mind. She understood that life had a way of revealing what must be seen, and often it did so when the heart was most unprepared. In the dim light of the ultrasound room, the hum of machines was steady, almost comforting. But as the doctor guided the probe across her belly, the screen flickered, and a strange stillness fell. His brow furrowed. The air thickened with an unspoken tension. He stopped breathing for a heartbeat, then another, as if the truth had reached him before words could form. Silence stretched. The gentle thrum of her unborn child became a drumbeat of anticipation, a rhythm she felt deep in her chest. Something moved beneath the calm surface of ordinary life. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the screen. He had been trained to carry news with care, to honor families, and yet here, Culture and ethics collided within him. This is unusual, he whispered, eyes flicking toward her. We must consider carefully what this means. His voice, though quiet, carried weight. He balanced his duty with the fear of consequences, caught between the respect for tradition and the inevitability of truth. She noticed nothing yet, only the weight of the moment pressing against the walls of the room, as if even the machines held their breath. The room seemed smaller than it had ever been, though it held only her, the doctor, and the soft hum of machines. The screen flickered once, then again, revealing a truth that did not obey calendars or expectations. She stared at the grainy shapes, her pulse quickening, and in that moment the world outside, bright markets, gossiping neighbors, her husband's proud smile, seemed irrelevant. Life had a way of revealing what had been hidden, and destiny refused to align neatly with appearances. The numbers, the timing, the lineage all whispered a quiet contradiction. The child she carried bore a truth that no ceremony, no house, no husband could rewrite. The doctor's hands were steady, yet his eyes betrayed caution. "You must understand," he began softly, almost in a murmur, "what I am about to tell you. It is not spoken to frighten you, but to guide you." His voice, though gentle, carried the weight of generations who had learned that words could heal or destroy. The facts, they do not match what the world expects. You are not at fault, and yet the path forward must be chosen carefully. Every word hung between them like a drumbeat in an empty village square, urgent and impossible to ignore. I don't understand," she whispered. Her hands rested lightly on her belly, almost as if to shield the truth within. "You have been faithful," he said, "but this child, it speaks its own truth. And in our world, truth carries consequences. Sometimes, the greatest protection is to step away from what appears safe." "Step away." Her voice trembled. "You mean divorce?" "Yes," he said quietly, his gaze steady but heavy. "Not as punishment, not as condemnation, but as a shield, for your spirit, your safety, your dignity." The words fell like stones into a still pond, rippling out into every corner of her heart. Shock rippled through her, disbelief gnawed at her chest, and yet beneath it all, a small ember of understanding glowed. Love and survival often pull in opposite directions. Alone in her thoughts later, she felt the storm inside her. Loyalty whispered, "Do not betray the vows you took." Dignity countered, "Do not lose yourself for obedience that blinds you." The silence that had always been her refuge now suffocated her. She had learned to speak softly, to bow her head, to bend beneath tradition, but the truth inside her demanded recognition. She could not remain quiet. The weight of choices pressed down, and her heart trembled between love and self-respect. Meanwhile, he waited outside, sensing a change in the air. A shadow stretched across his pride, long and unfamiliar, reaching for corners he had once assumed were his alone. She did not speak of what she had learned, and yet he knew. He could feel it in the subtle distances, the measured steps, the quiet that had never been hers before. His denial rose first, sharp and protective, a shield he wielded with authority. Then anger, controlled yet simmering beneath the surface. Finally, a shadow of fear lingered. Exposure always follows where pride refuses to listen. "Everything is fine," he muttered to himself later, pacing the polished floors of the home that had once seemed invincible. But even as he spoke, he could feel the balance shifting. Some truths, once uncovered, refused to be hidden again. He had always spoken with the calm authority of a man who believed the world bent to his hand. Yet now, each word he offered was carefully veiled in concern, soft as a river breeze, but carrying the weight of a hidden blade. "Do not anger the elders," he said, his tone gentle, almost protective. "They see what we cannot. You must behave, for the sake of tradition, for the sake of the family." She nodded, her hands pressed lightly against her belly, feeling the life growing within her. But she knew the mask of respect hid sharp edges. Every command, every lesson, was a test, a subtle tightening of control. Tradition, once a guiding light, had become a weapon pointed at her heart. Beyond the walls of her home, the elders sat in a circle, their faces carved from years of wisdom and worry. Some leaned forward, voices quiet but firm, defending honor and insisting that appearances must be maintained at all costs. "A woman's word must bend to the house," one declared, eyes stern. Others looked down, unease flickering in their gaze. They had glimpsed the threads of betrayal weaving beneath the surface, felt the chill of unspoken truths brushing the edges of respect. "And what of the child?" another whispered, voice heavy. "If silence hides wrongdoing, who will answer when the consequences come?" Arguments circled like hawks above a village, sharp and urgent. Fear clashed with wisdom, pride with morality. Every elder knew that in protecting the family, they risked burying justice. But tradition demanded masks, and masks demanded obedience. Outside, the whispers moved faster than the feet of market children racing home from school. Quiet conversations flitted through the streets, in kitchens and at water wells, spreading knowledge like sparks in dry grass. Respectability was cracking, slowly, imperceptibly, yet enough to stir the winds of reckoning. The community sensed the storm, even if it had not yet rained. And in her womb, the child stirred, a tiny drum beating with a force that could not be silenced. Each movement was a declaration. Truth exists, even when hidden, even when feared. Destiny refused to be buried beneath the weight of pretense and power. The unborn life became a signal, a rhythm to which the world could not remain deaf. Justice, it seemed, had begun even before the first cry, shaping the hearts of those who dared to listen. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, her hands folded lightly before her belly, her eyes calm as water before the first rain. Around her, voices trembled like dry leaves in the wind, eager for a storm, but she remained still. Fire could have raged around her, accusations and anger, yet she chose silence, patience, and dignity. Every step she had taken, every smile and nod in obedience, had not been weakness, it had been preparation for this moment. Strength did not roar here, it waited quietly, like the baobab whose roots hold the earth while the world spins above. In the center of the house, the elders gathered, circling like hawks over a field of hidden truths. Eyes narrowed, hands clasped, their breaths measured. There was no shouting, no pointed finger, only the careful patience of those who knew that truth could enter without drama and leave marks deeper than any sword. The doctor stepped forward, his presence unassuming but undeniable. In his hands, the proof of what had been hidden, a small bundle of medical records, a history that refused to remain secret. He laid them on the table, careful, respectful, without a word of accusation. The documents themselves spoke louder than any voice. Dates, scans, notes, lines connecting the unseen dots, lines that questioned the foundations of a family built on appearances. "Look," he said quietly, "the evidence has always been here. Only now can we see it clearly." Family records, kept meticulously over generations, were brought forth. Birth certificates, letters, and testimonies whispered in the shadows were placed alongside the medical proof. Every piece aligned like stars in a constellation, revealing a story no amount of pride could hide. The past had risen, like dust under bare feet, swirling with memories long buried. Ancestral consequences returned with the inevitability of the sunrise. Fate refused to be delayed any longer. The husband, once a figure of authority and respect, felt his image cracking. Each document, each revelation, loosened the carefully built mask of control he had worn for years. The silence around him was heavier than any accusation. He shifted, hands trembling, his voice caught in the throat. This cannot be," he whispered, almost to himself, almost pleading. His power, long unchallenged, dissolved slowly, like morning mist burned by the first sun. Fear replaced control, and respect, so carefully commanded, slipped quietly into the corners of the room, unnoticed until it was gone. She remained still, a figure of calm in the storm, letting the truth unfold without interference. Dignity shaped the moment, and in her quiet endurance, she became taller than any shouted word, stronger than any threatened power. The circle of elders, the doctor, the documents, the past itself, all converged to reveal a reality that needed no witness to survive. In that silence, a new order began to take root. The world could no longer ignore what had always been. He spoke quickly, words tumbling over one another like frightened birds. "This is impossible. There must be a mistake." His hands shook as he reached for papers, for proofs, for anything that might hold the world together. Every measure of control he had built over years seemed to dissolve in the quiet weight of truth. She remained still. Her eyes did not flare with accusation, her hands did not tremble with fear. "I see," she said softly, a calm that pressed against the panic in the room. "I understand." Her voice carried no bitterness, only the quiet authority of someone who had carried patience as a shield for many seasons. Power was shifting, unseen, without struggle, as the walls of falsehood gave way to reality. Outside, the community began to stir. Not with shouting, not with gossip, but with a slow awakening, as if the very air had whispered secrets no one dared speak before. Eyes that had once judged now lingered in quiet reflection. Respectability, once a fragile mask, began to settle on new foundations, and shame replaced the idle murmur of gossip. The streets felt the weight of collective realization, a hush that demanded attention without a single voice raising blame. The elders, seated in their circle, let the silence speak for them. No hammer struck, no tongue lashed, yet the verdict was clear. Their wisdom, earned through seasons of seeing and surviving, chose restraint over spectacle. The traditions they had upheld, sometimes rigid, sometimes protective, corrected themselves in quiet rhythm. Justice had not been shouted, it had simply arrived, carried on the stillness of those who understood the balance of life. The doctor stepped back, his hands empty now of papers but heavy with the weight of his duty. He had spoken only what fate allowed, never forcing truth but letting it move through those ready to receive it. "I have done what I must," he murmured. "The rest is for the heart and the ancestors to decide." His words, gentle and measured, floated across the room, carrying the authority of both healer and messenger. She stood alone, yet not lonely. Her presence shaped the space, heavier than the voices around her. Where chaos had once threatened, strength now anchored itself. One woman, standing where noise could not reach, held the moral center of a story older than any city, older than the streets themselves. In her silence, she became more than witness. She became the standard, the quiet force against which the world would measure truth and dignity. Pride, once towering like the baobab in the center of the village, had fallen quietly, as if it could no longer hold its weight. There were no drums of celebration, no public shaming. Justice had arrived on the winds of truth, gentle yet unstoppable. The balance that had been disrupted for so long settled again, not by punishment, but by the quiet rhythm of honor restored. It was the way the elders had always taught. When the arrogant refuse to listen, the world itself rearranges to show them the path they ignored. She walked through her home, each step deliberate, each breath a reclamation. No one could see the hours she had spent in silence, the nights filled with endurance and the mornings wrapped in prayer. "I will not carry shame that is not mine," she whispered to herself. The walls, once witnesses to obedience and restraint, now reflected strength. Self-worth became her foundation, quiet as the river that cut valleys through stone, persistent yet unseen. Every meal she prepared, every word she spoke, radiated dignity, proof that life could bloom even after betrayal. When her husband saw the distance she had carved, he felt the absence of her presence like a shadow stretching across the walls he once controlled. "I thought I could hold the story," he said, voice low, "but the truth has outgrown my hands." The separation was not a loss for her, it was restoration. There was no anger, no bitterness in her eyes, only the calm certainty of someone who had finally let go. Healing began with the release of what had never belonged to her. The child, small and breathing softly in her arms, became the drum that could not be silenced. Innocence pulsed with hope, untouched by the past lies that had threatened to define them both. "You will know the truth of this world," she whispered, "and it will be yours without fear." Each coo and blink reminded her that the future was hers to shape, untangled from deceit. The bond they shared was rooted in honesty, the kind that time could not erode. He remained alone, the weight of his choices pressing against his chest like stones in a riverbed. There was no one to shield him from the consequences he had ignored, no ally to share the burden of his ambition unchecked by morality. Pride, once his shield, had offered nothing but solitude. He saw, too late, that respect demanded truth, and power without conscience was hollow. And so, life returned to its rhythm. The city continued its hum of drums and glass towers, but within her home, within her heart, a new story was being told, a story where silence had carved freedom and endurance had become justice. In the quiet, she had become both teacher and witness, the living proof that dignity, once claimed, could never be stolen. The streets that once whispered now held a different rhythm. Where gossip had once spread like fire through dry grass, there was only a careful stillness. People walked more softly, glancing not with judgment but with reflection. Mothers paused while tending their children, merchants lowered voices at stalls, and even the children's laughter carried a gentler cadence. The community had learned, without a single accusation, that true worth was measured not by appearances or rumors, but by integrity, by the courage to face the truth when silence might have seemed safer. Elders gathered beneath the ancient baobab, their eyes deep with thought. They spoke not in anger but in quiet guidance. "A house built on honor but without truth crumbles with the first wind," one murmured, fingers tracing lines on bark-worn wood. Another nodded, eyes on the horizon. "We teach our children to respect the old ways, but let them remember, truth is the foundation. Without it, all else is empty." Ancestral voices seemed to rise with the wind, carrying the weight of generations, reminding the living of justice beyond mere law or punishment. She walked past the crowds, each stride a statement of her reclaimed life. Her head lifted, chest open, steps steady against the stones of the path. Every movement spoke of dignity, every breath of choice. The past did not cling, it was left behind like a cloak shed in the morning sun. Each footfall seemed to echo through the alleys, a silent drum of liberation that even the winds carried to the market, the school, and the gathering of elders. She was no longer defined by what had been stolen or hidden. Her life was hers, unburdened, guided by her own moral compass. The words of the ancients lingered in the air, unspoken yet understood. Truth waits patiently. It does not demand belief, nor seek permission. A woman who knows her worth does not need the consent of others to be free. And betrayal, whether by spouse or neighbor, rings louder than the noise of divorce or shame. With these truths framing her path, she stepped into a future where silence had been her teacher and endurance had been her shield. Freedom was not loud, it was quiet, profound, and undeniable.